In this episode of Abandoned West Kentucky, we won't be talking about a business or a property. We will be talking about the legendary Speedy Atkins, a man who spent more of his time in the public eye deceased than he did living. Stick around for the unbelievable story of Paducah's most famous mummy, Charles Speedy Atkins. Charles Speedy Atkins, sometimes referred to as Henry in some publications, was born in 1875 and spent his early years in Tennessee, eventually making his way to Kentucky to look for work as an adult. Charles found work in the tobacco industry at Dixon Tobacco, and even got his nickname Speedy from working in tobacco due to his quickness in handling the crop. According to Wikipedia, while in Paducah, Kentucky, Charles befriended a man named A.Z. Hammock, an African American who owned the city's only funeral home specifically for African Americans. At this time in history, segregation had unfortunately yet to be abolished. Speedy's friend A.Z. Hammock, the owner of the funeral home, will become a very important figure later in the story. On May 30th, 1928, Speedy went fishing on the Ohio riverbank near Owens Island. According to reports, as the warm afternoon set in, Speedy somehow fell into the river and drowned while fishing. A few stories out there mention that Speedy frequently drank homemade brew, and some claim that this may have contributed to him falling in the river. None of Speedy's family came forward to claim the body, so the owner of the funeral home mentioned earlier, A.Z. Hammock, was given the body to perform what was then considered a pauper's burial. A pauper's burial is a grave paid for at public expense because the deceased person's family could not afford one, or no family members could be found. A.Z. Hammock had developed an embalming fluid, and instead of burial, A.Z. decided to perform an experiment on Speedy using this special embalming fluid that he mixed himself in hopes it would preserve the body and keep all odors at bay. Hammock reportedly received permission from the local coroner to perform the experiment. According to several sources, A.Z. was fascinated by how Egyptians mummified bodies and wanted to try the process himself. A.Z.'s secret mixture of embalming fluid turned Speedy's corpse into a wooden-like statue, transforming his skin into a reddish color, but leaving his facial features recognizable. Hammock often put the well-preserved body on display at his funeral home. When it wasn't on display, it was stored in the funeral home's closet. Locals and tourists alike would visit the body, and it quickly became a popular tourist attraction. In 1937, Speedy was again a victim of the Ohio River, as floodwaters rushed through downtown Paducah during the famous 1937 flood, washing Speedy's body away from the funeral home. Some members of the cleanup crew recognized Speedy and returned him to Hammock shortly after finding him. While on display at the funeral home, Speedy's body was taken very good care of. Staff would carefully wash and dress him 3 times a year to keep mold away. A.Z. Hammock died December 26, 1949, never sharing his secret embalming formula with anyone, only revealing that the concoction's ingredients could be purchased at a grocery store. After AZ's passing, his wife Velma took over custody of Speedy's body, and kept it on display for another 45 years, welcoming anyone who wanted to visit him. In May of 1994, Speedy was finally laid to rest 66 years after his death. About 200 people attended the service for him at the Washington Street Baptist Church. Reverend H. Joseph Franklin said of Speedy at the funeral, "He came to Paducah a pauper, poor, homeless, a nobody. Today, he's going to be laid to rest at last as a celebrity." Speedy's funeral, coffin, and burial plot were all donated by businesses in the neighborhood where he once lived. He is buried at Maple Lawn Park Cemetery. Velma Hammock said of Speedy, "I never saw a dead man bring so much happiness to people." Throughout his time on display at the funeral home, museums and carnivals tried to buy Speedy from AZ and Velma Hammock. But AZ refused, saying, "Slavery was over, and we don't sell bodies at the Hammock Funeral Home." Thanks for joining us on this look back at Charles Speedy Atkins, a man who became famous in one of the most unique ways imaginable. Leave a comment below if you remember hearing about this story, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content featuring stories, abandoned buildings, and all things Western Kentucky.
Lock it up, I'm bound for heaven's shore. Lock it up, I'm ready to die. Well, I'm dead blind and all I see, nothing that I love, like the way my baby looked at me. For 2 long years since she been gone, and I've been feeling low. I've loved in my life lonely. Oh, lock it up, I'm ready to go. Don't you see my baby in the sky? Lock it up, I'm bound for heaven's shore. Lock it up, I'm ready to die.
Finally tonight, he's considered by some to be the pride of Paducah as he stands tall in his tuxedo greeting tourists and customers. The problem is the guy's been dead for years. His name is Speedy, and he is more popular dead than alive. Bob Hansen reports from Paducah, Kentucky.
Paducah, Kentucky. It's a city founded on the river, a city proud of its history, whether it's an old church or an historic hotel. But there's a piece of the past here you won't read about in the brochures, an attraction you'll only hear about from the people who live here.
Speedy.
Speedy! Speedy! This is Speedy, a man who spent the last 60 years in this Paducah funeral home.
I said, Speedy, you were nobody, but you somebody now.
It was May 1928, and Speedy Atkins had come here to the banks of the Tennessee River to go fishing. Well, Speedy drowned that day. His friends fished him out of the river and took him over to the Hammock Funeral Home. Speedy never left.
Come on, Speedy, you got some friends who want to see you.
Velma Hammock is the best friend Speedy ever had. She cares for him, makes sure his tux looks good, and props him up when visitors come by.
People die in 4 or 5 days you bury them. But somebody wants to see how a man been dead 35 or 40 years, because it's hard to believe that you can keep anybody that long.
Speedy was embalmed 61 years ago this month as part of an experiment by Velma's husband, A.Z. Hammock. A.Z. died in the 40s and was buried, but not Speedy, even though he did get out once, back in 37.
And Speedy floated out in the flood, and the men happened to see him and got in a boat and rescued him, brought him back. And the only thing happened, he just got a little mud on him, flood mud, and I scrubbed that off.
Velma says she'll bury Speedy soon, in 2 years, on what would have been her husband's 100th birthday. Velma says she'll miss her dead friend, but says he'll never be forgotten.
He's a legend now.
I'm Bob Hansen for CNN in Paducah, Kentucky.